warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hey, good day for everyone. My name is Tita Rosa Sabila, last student number 033.
Hello everyone, my name is Eti Fatmasari. My last student number is 016.
Hello everyone, my name is Bunga Shani and Rifana with last student number 022.
Hello everyone, my name is Linda Sarisol. My last student number is 010.
Hello everyone, my name is Kayla Manda Azara. My last student number is 050.
And today, we're diving into two important concepts in morphology, productivity and creativity. These are all about how we make new words in language, and it sounds very interesting. Let's get into the key terms first. So, our 7 key terms from the introduction on productivity and creativity. The first is productivity. It's the ability of a word formation process to be used regularly to create new words. Second is creativity. It's like forming new words in novel or playful ways, often using less common processes. Third, word formation. It's the process of creating new words in language. Fourth, suffixes. Examples include suffix ness in productive and suffix th in creative or unproductive. Fifth is blending. Blending is combining parts of two words to make a new one. Sixth is transparency. Transparency is how easy it is to understand a new word created by a productive process. And the last is frequency. Frequency is how often a certain word formation process is used in language. Now, I'll explain what each of them means and use some examples so we all understand how they work. Let's get started. Let's start with productivity first. This is all about how easy it is to create new words using certain patterns or rules. So think of it like having reliable formula you can always use. So for example, in English, if you want to turn an adjective into a noun, you can usually just add the suffix ness. So we have happy and then we add the suffix ness to make happiness. This process works for a lot of adjectives like kind becoming kindness or dark becoming darkness. Since we can use it with so many different words, we say it's a very productive process. Next, we've got creativity. So creativity in morphology happens when we make up new words in fun, playful, or unusual ways. This doesn't follow the regular formula because one example is when someone might say cold instead of warm to describe being cool. This word doesn't exist in common usage, but it's understandable and fun. That's creativity. When someone breaks the usual rules to invent word for special effect, humor, or just to be different. In daily lives, we call it as slang. Now, let's look at word formation. What is word formation? So, this is the general process of how we create new words. It includes productive processes like adding suffixes to words, but also creative ones like making up new blends. For example, you know the word brunch. It's a blend of breakfast and lunch. That's a creative way to form a new word. One way we can create new word is by adding suffixes. We've already seen how adding suffix ness can create new words like happiness. Or other productive suffix include suffix li, like quick, turning into quickly, and suffix like teach, becoming teacher. These are the examples of productive word formation because they follow predictable rules. However, not all word creation is equally productive because some processes lose their productivity over time. For example, the suffix th, like in warmth or length, is no longer productive. You don't hear people making up new words with the suffix th. So if someone says cold to describe being cool, that's not productive, but it's creative. Now, the two things that affect whether a word formation process is productive or creative are transparency and frequency. First is transparency. It's how easy it is to understand the meaning of a new word. For example, if I say happiness, it's clear that it comes from happy. The meaning is easy to figure out, so the process is transparent. The more transparent a process is, the more productive it tends to be. Now, on the other hand, there's frequency. Frequency is how often a process is used. By adding the suffix ness to adjectives happens all the time in English, which makes it a frequent and productive process. But some things like adding the suffix th, like warmth, is very rare now, so it's not frequent or productive anymore. Finally, sometimes a process that used to be productive becomes less common over time. We call this a historical change in productivity. But even if a process isn't productive anymore, it can still be used creatively. So, in summary, we use productivity to describe word formation rules that are easy to apply and use often, like adding suffix ness to adjectives. Creativity, on the other hand, is when we play around with language and make new words in unexpected or fun ways. like blending words or using less common suffixes like suffix th. We judge how productive a process is based on how transparent and frequent it is in the language. That is all for me. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. So now I'll be discussing the factors that contribute to morphological productivity. So what is productivity? Productivity in morphology refers to the ability of a language process to create new words or lexemes. Several factors influence how productive a morphological process can be. So let's explore these factors in more details. The first one, we have transparency. The first factor is transparency. A transparent process allows words to be easily broken down into their parts, where each part has a clear, distinct meaning. For example, if we take the suffix ness, we see it creates noun from adjective. Words like happiness or kindness clearly indicate a state of being happy or state of being kind. This transparency makes it easy for speakers to understand and create new words. In contrast, the suffix "it" is less transparent. While it can also form nouns, it sometimes changes the pronunciation or stress of the base word. For instance, timid becomes timidity, and local becomes locality. Moreover, some words formed with "it" like oddity don't just mean the state of being odd. An oddity refers to something strange, which is different from the compositional meaning. This lack of transparency makes it less productive than ness. Second one, we have frequency of base type, which refers to how many different words an affix can attach to. If an affix can only attach to a limited set of bases, it has fewer opportunities to create new words, and it's therefore less productive. For example, consider the suffix "-esque", which means in the style of. It often attached to proper names like Kafkaesque, in the style of Kafka's work, or Reagan-esque, in the style of Ronald Reagan. However, it doesn't freely attach to any noun, and thus is less productive. The third one, we have usefulness. So the final factor is usefulness, which is about how much speakers of a language need to create certain type of words. If a word formation process fills a need, it will be more productive. For instance, affixes like ness and et are very useful because they allow speakers to create nouns from almost any adjective. On the other hand, the suffix as in actress and stewardess, waiters, was once more productive when there was a need to specifically identify a female in a certain role. However, with the rise of gender-neutral language, this suffix has become less productive, as it is rarely used to create new words today. To sum up, the productivity of morphological process depends on factors like transparency, frequency of base type, and usefulness. Transparent as
Now I will explain the restrictions on productivity. So in these sections, we will explore different kinds of restrictions that may apply to lexeme formation processes. We learned that there could be different sorts of restrictions on what sorts of base an affix might attach to, including, first, categorical restrictions. So, almost all affixes are restricted to bases of specific categories. For example, affixes "et" and "ness" attached to adjectives, affix "is" attached to nouns and adjectives, or affix "an" attached to adjectives or verbs. The second one, phonological restrictions. So, sometimes affixes will attach only to bases that fit certain phonological patterns. For example, affix "is" prefers nouns and adjectives that consist of two or more syllables, where the final syllable does not bear primary stress. The suffix "an", which forms verb from adjectives, attached only to bases that end in obstruent. For example, stops, fricatives, and abricate. So we can get darken, brighten, and deepen. But slimmen and tollen, which end in sonorant consonants, are impossible. And then the third one is the meaning of the base. For example, negative "un" prefers bases that are not themselves negative in meaning. We might find unlovely but not unugly, unhappy but not unsaid. To these sorts of restrictions, we might add first etymological restrictions. So some affixes are restricted to particular subclasses of bases. For example, there are affixes in English that prefer to attach to bases that are native. For example, the suffix "n" that forms adjectives from nouns like wooden, waxen, but not metallen or carbonen. On the other hand, another suffix "ig" that forms adjectives from nouns like parasitic and dramatic will not attach to native bases, only to bases that are borrowed into English from French or Latin. And then the second one, syntactic restrictions. So sometimes affixes are sensitive to syntactic properties of their bases. For example, the suffix able generally attached to transitive verbs, specifically verbs that can be passivized. So, from the transitive verb love, we can get lovable, but from the intransitive verb snore, there is no snoreable. And then the third one is from Bauer, 2001, 135, gives the following example. In Dirbal, which Australian Aboriginal language spoken in northeast Queensland by the Dirbal people, there is a suffix "ginai" that means covered with, although there might conceivably be a use for a word meaning something like covered with honey. In fact, the suffix occurs in Dirbal only on bases that denote things that are dirty or unpleasant, like gunaginai, which means covered with feces. What's considered dirty or unpleasant might to some extent be a function of cultural beliefs. We will explain the next part, how to finding words. You might wonder how morphologists go about finding all the words with one affix or another. For prefixes, of course, we can look in a dictionary and find words formed with that prefix alphabetized more or less together. It's said more or less because sometimes non-prefixed words will intervene alphabetically between forms with a prefix. For example, prelude intervenes between preloved and premarital in the concise Oxford English Dictionary. But in normal dictionary, words with suffixes are alphabetized according to their bases. Nevertheless, there are at least two ways of finding all the words with a particular suffix. The first one is to look in a backwards word list like Lechner, 1971. A backwards word list gives word alphabetized, starting with the last letter, rather than the first. So, all the words with iri or ness can be found together. But we will notice immediately that using a backwards word list is not a perfect tool. Such word lists simply alphabetize words from the end to the beginning. So any word ending in iri will occur in the list, not just words that really have the suffix iri. Like the example from the list, in addition to real iri, words like odiri and rensiriri, we find jang like ranti-iriti, which is spelled two different ways. Even a bit earlier in the list, we would have found the word siri, which of course also ends in the sequence of letters it2. So if you work with a backwards word list, be prepared to go through its word by word and check whether you really have an example of the suffix you're looking for, and whether you really just have one example as opposed to several derivatives. The second one is by using the OED or the Oxford English Dictionary online. To do so, instead of typing a whole word in the find word box, type the suffix preceded by the asterisk. The asterisk is what's called a wild card. It stands for any characters that precede the one is that you're looking for. Again, You'll get a long list which contains many words with the suffix in question, plus a lot of junk. As with the backwards word list, you'll need to be prepared to go through by hand and read out those examples that don't really contain the suffix you're interested in of the same word. Thank you.
So, we are going to explore various ways of measuring productivity and lexeme formation processes. The lexeme formation productivity can tell us a lot about language structure and development, and understanding how to measure this productivity can provide useful insight. So, factors influencing productivity. The productivity of a lexeme formation process can depend on multiple factors. Restriction on possible bigs. Not all bigs are eligible for every formation process. Usefulness of word form. Words that are useful tend to be more productive. Transparency of the process. Processes that are easy to understand and predict are more productive. So understanding this picture help us get a sense of productivity, but can we go further and actually measure it, and if so, how? Next, the challenge of measuring productivity. One's idea for measuring productivity is by counting all items formed with a specific process in a dictionary. However, most morphology argue that this approach is flawed. Issue with new words. Counting dictionary entries doesn't tell us about the potential for creating new word, which is key to productivity. Transparency and dictionary listing process that produce transparent meanings often don't need to be listed in dictionaries. Less productive processes, which yield more opaque meanings, are more likely to be listed, leading to paradoxical results. So, in summary, counting dictionary entries might misleadingly suggest that less productive processes are actually more productive. Next, Aronov's ratio method, a more structured approach, comes from Aronov 1976, who proposed measuring productivity by looking at the ratio of actual word formed with an affix to the potential base for that affix. For example, consider the suffix ask. The Oxford English Dictionary lists around 220 words with ask. But if ask can attach to any name with two or more syllables, determining the total number of possible bases is extremely challenging. Awareness method also face issues as it's difficult to quantify the exact number of potential bits. Bayes frequency-based measure, a more sophisticated method by Bayes, 1989, uses the concept of token frequency. So type versus tokens. Types count its distinct word range, while tokens counts all occurrences. Observation, the less productive a lexeme formation process, the higher its token frequency, as these words are more likely to be repeated and more lexicalized in meaning. The Bayesian approach focuses on apex ligament, types that occur only once in corpus. By calculating the ratio of apex to all tokens, we can get productivity. For example, this method confirms that NUS is more productive than ITY. Now, how the productivity of lexeme formation processes change over time, focusing specifically on the suffix dome in English. Change in productivity, lexeme formation processes can fluctuate in productivity. A prime example is the suffix dome, which attaches to nouns to form new nouns, such as ship dome, fan dome, and star dome. Measuring historical productivity. To measure the historical productivity of term, we can analyze for a citation in the Oxford English Dictionary by counting the term words and noting their first citation years. We can calculate the percentage of this word among the total citation for each century. Historical insight, the suffix dom has achieved a role with high productivity note in the 12th century. However, its productivity declined from the 14th to the 18th century. Interestingly, there was significant resurgence in productivity during the 19th century, peaking in the 1880. The 19th century trends, notable authors like Thomas Carlyle, Mark Twain, and Sinclair Lewis contribute to the rise in productivity of Dom during this period. The exact reason for this increase are still unclear, but in highlight the dynamic nature of language. Expansion of base in the 19th century, the range of base for the suffix dom expanded, originally limited to titles and a few adjectives. It began attaching to a broader array of nouns, including names of animals, for example, puppy, dog, and common terms, example, school, magazine. Ongoing productivity, when worked in the early 1940, argued that the productivity of dom did not significantly decline after the 20th century, although it remains productive. It's like the same popularity it had during the 1880. So, In conclusion, the example of the suffix "dom" illustrates the evolving nature of word formation processes over time. Similar trends can likely be observed in other languages and suffixes, reflecting change in linguistic productivity.
Next, we are moving on to the last part, which is productivity versus creativity, which contrasts two types of word formation processes in morphology. Productive processes, which happen frequently and often go unnoticed, and creative processes, which are used consciously to generate new, eye-catching, or playful words. Let's discuss one by one. The first one is productivity. Productive morphological processes occur so regularly that speakers don't usually notice them. When we create words using highly productive processes, it happens effortlessly and usually without conscious attention. Also, listeners can usually understand these words without paying special attention to them being new. Productivity is tied to transparency. Words formed through productive processes tend to be clear in meaning, easy to segment, and follow predictable patterns, allowing speakers and listeners to use and understand them seamlessly. For examples, the first one is adding suffix "ness" to adjectives, like the word happy to happiness, kind to kindness. These formations happen regularly and speakers use them without thinking because this is a productive process in English. The second example is using suffix "er" to form agent of nouns. Teach to teacher, sing to singer. The process of adding suffix "er" to verbs to create nouns that indicate someone who performs the action is productive and predictable. And the last example is plural formation with suffix "s" or "es, like in the word cat to cats, bus to buses. This is one of the most productive rules in English. It applies to a vast majority of nouns to form their plural versions. The second one is creativity. Creativity, by contrast, deals with unproductive or marginal processes. These occur when speakers consciously create new words, often for humorous, playful, or rhetorical purposes. These words draw attention precisely because they deviate from standard, productive processes. For examples, the first one is blending, like in the word brunch from breakfast and lunch, and smoke from the word smoke and folk. These blends are creative, as they combine parts of two words to make a new one, often to be playful or concise. The second example is clipping or shortening longer words. For example, like in the word telephone to phone and then refrigerator to fridge. Clipping is a creative way of forming new words by shortening existing ones, often to make them more casual or convenient in speech. And the last example is novel suffix turn for humor or emphasis, like in the word adulting, using the noun adult as a verb with suffix ing to humorously describe doing adult responsibilities. And then, like in the word catastrophize, adding the verb forming suffix "ize" to catastrophe to creatively mean exaggerating problems. These are creative uses of word formation where suffixes are applied in playful or non-standard ways to create new meanings. So the contrast, while productive processes are rule-governed and widely understood, creative processes are more about bending or breaking the rules. Although creative words may be understood, they are not as easily predictable because they don't follow the regular rules of word formation. Both productivity and creativity are vital to language. Productivity keeps language functional and systematic, while creativity allows for expression, playfulness, and adaptability. So, in conclusion, this chapter examines the processes of productivity and creativity in word formation, showing how they play crucial roles in language development. Productivity refers to the regular, predictable use of morphological rules to create new words. Productivity also ensures that languages can expand systematically, while creativity, in contrast, deals with non-standard, often playful or imaginative word formations that do not follow regular patterns. I think that's all from our group. Thank you.